Discussions about the values of the institution. At some point, I think Dr. Smith would tell you a little bit about the evolution of these values, which was a tremendous journey, but really extremely important in helping us define what it was we wanted to be. And I think that sort of fits nicely into, we'll look at the vision and look at the future. So of all the speakers that we've had to date, there's obviously no one better suited, since it's really the thing he always continuously gets hired for, whatever job he's ever been in, as the person who's supposed to be able to see the future. We know what Yogi Berra said about that, but you can obviously tell us a little bit more about how difficult that is. For those of you who don't know enough about Dr. Smith, I'm just going to tell you a couple of things. One is that you know of him as the dean, you know of him as the physician-in-chief and executive vice president of the entire North Shore-LIJ health system, where he was also asked all the time to determine what the vision of that institution should be, as well as of the medical school. But I think the most important thing that you need to know about him is his sort of history as a physician. And I won't go through that in excruciating detail, but he's had some phenomenal training in internal medicine, also in nephrology. He did a lot of dialysis on his own at a lot of places in the old days. But he is an incredibly gifted physician, to the point where you really, no matter where you go in the United States, you know, somebody says, oh, you get to work with Larry Smith, he was my, and they don't say, you know, he was my executive vice president, he's my physician-in-chief. He taught me how to do morning report, he taught me how to talk to patients about stopping smoking, he taught me medicine, I worked with him at this place and that place, you know, say hi to him for us. And as something to sort of let you know how important that is, he was, this past year, elected by the American College of Physicians to be a master of the American College of Physicians. I'm not really sure how many living masters there are. It really is sort of the crowning achievement, I think, that he would also point to in his role, because to be a master of the American College of Physicians, you know, bottom line, no matter what your discipline, you have to be considered the very, very best, which he is. So you're our leader, and you are going to tell us a little bit about our value of vision.
So let me tell you a little bit about the journey of these values. And you know, I said when we decided to have people come and talk about our values, the one value I surely wouldn't want to have to talk about is this vision one. What the heck does that mean? And we're not having an ophthalmology lecture tonight, so for those of you who came for that, go ahead home. But what Dave said was true. When we first decided to create the medical school, our first instinct was to run as fast as we could to get an innovative, exciting curriculum plan, because that's the whole fun of starting a new medical school. And we had a couple of conversations with people who were wiser than us around the country. And they said, well, you know, if you're going to build a new curriculum, everyone is going to want their favorite thing in the curriculum. And before long, your curriculum will look just like the junky curriculums of every other school, loaded with nonsense that's incoherent and doesn't flow from one thing to the other, and it's everybody's pet thing that you must put in the curriculum, because it's like apple pie motherhood, and the curriculum will get gridlocked, and your students will be overloaded with facts, not learn how to think, and you'll just be another medical school. So the way to prevent that is to have a set of values that you make a judgment when each thing is presented to you that must be taught in your curriculum. How do you make a judgment as to whether it's appropriate? So we embarked on what we thought would be an afternoon to establish our values. 6 months later, we emerged from that discussion having not done anything except try to define who we were going to be and what we were going to stand for. And you'll see we'll go over all of the values tonight before we're done. But one of them was the value of vision. It was not clear to me how I would go about doing this, but I thought we would start with the passing of someone that everyone seems to believe is a visionary. And in fact, I looked today, and on Amazon, his biography, which has yet to come out, is the #1 bestseller in the United States. And that's with people just pre-ordering it. And why? It's very clear. There are only a few people who really take us to a new place. and those people do things that are special for other people and special for us overall. And so, a little bit of a tribute to a man who did see the future differently, conceived of what really wasn't there before. And so let's think about it. I looked up a number of definitions of vision because I still can't figure out what this thing exactly is. So, you know, the willingness and the ability to see beyond what is to what will be. And then to create an image of what the future could or should be. Could or should be. One is being visionary, and the other is being a leader in being visionary. Well, but as a cultural value, it also presumes that as an institution, and that's what this medical school that we're creating is, has the courage and the fortitude and the integrity to go after a vision once it forms a vision. So Dave often reminded me as we were planning our curriculum that none of our graduates will practice medicine independently before the year 2020. And we will all probably not even remember who they were because we'll be demented by then. No, not really, but close. And what is 2020 going to look like for the practice of medicine? And that's what we had to imagine. What's going to be different in 2020 and what's going to be the same in 2020 or 2025? And how do we prepare ourselves who have never experienced the year 2020 to prepare young people to be able to be the best when they enter a world that we can only project and hope that we get right? Well, I think the first part of this is that as an institution, if you don't have this, you can't have this. And I've spent a lifetime meeting people who define the word integrity. And I've often realized that if you list all the virtues of good doctors, most of which are kind of insipid, the one word that is always attached to the best doctors is integrity. And I have been disturbed by all of the Webster Dictionary definitions of integrity because I think the people who have it, I've understood. And why did they use a word that means one with oneself, if you look at just the root of it? And really, to me, integrity, whether it's a person or an institution, is the ability to set high standards by yourself, of yourself, and then to live up to those standards regardless of whether anyone is watching. And you either have that or you don't have it. People who have it don't care about how the external world assesses them because they are harder on themselves than anyone else. They set the benchmark high, and they very silently, without a lot of fanfare, never let themselves not meet that benchmark that they set. And I believe without this, vision for an institution is meaningless. It's just fantasy. Vision also implies that you're not afraid of change. But we all know that everybody's afraid of change, right? I mean, if you do Management 101, it's really like change management because everybody gets all crazy about change. When I was a residency director, I was so convinced that residents, under the stress of residency, were so afraid of change that if I walked in one day and said, guys, I'm changing your on-call from every 4th night to every 10th night, they would go on strike. They wouldn't even hear what I said. I was changing something and they would be in such a panic, they would all start screaming, no, no, you can't change our schedule. There was literally the fear of change superseded almost everything when I was trying to manage people who were under a lot of stress and a little bit shaky in their confidence. So how do we get a high-integrity organization filled with high-integrity people to accept change as what happens every morning compared to the morning before? Well, here's our value of vision. This is what we wrote during our 6-month journey to the values of our medical school. And it really says that we are committed to always looking forward. And we're looking forward because if we're going to create people who can transform the health of populations, they have to be ready to use the tools of tomorrow and the immutable skills of doctoring from yesterday, combined together to become really master clinicians. We also said that we stood for innovation, that we would be daring, that we would be a little bit crazy, that we would take risks, and that we were very comfortable failing. I will tell you, if you have never failed, you are not even close to where you ought to be in terms of risk-taking. Only people who realize that it's a mix of success and failure that makes people move forward with speed and which creates great people and great institutions. One of my very, very good friends once said to me, this man was the president of Goldman Sachs at the time, and he said to me, when I monitor my brokers, if they don't have enough losers in their portfolio, I know they're not pushing the envelope, and they're not making as much money as they can possibly make for our clients. Because if they only pick winners, then they're conservative, and they're leaving money on the table. Well, you could say the same thing for us in medicine. If everything we try works, then we're not even remotely daring enough. Now, it's unfortunate to be the poor students who are victimized by our failures, but we know that they're a very resilient group of people. It's also way more fun to be free to fail, learn from your failure, do it over again and succeed, than to try to plan, which you can never do. It's only a false sense of security, and all it does is paralyze you from ever really embarking on serious change. Well, what about these visionaries? You know, the futurists who see the future, the dreamers? Nobody's ever accused me of being a dreamer, but maybe a futurist. Perfectionist? Definitely not. But how about, some are not. Some are heroes to everyone else. Some are very quiet. So let me tell you the story of one of my heroes and the vision that he gave me once upon a time. So Daniel Berrigan, for the young people in the audience, was a philosopher, a Jesuit priest, and a jail inmate during the Vietnam War. He was one of the most vehement anti-war protesters in the country. And just to tell you how effective the pre-computer era was for protesters, the reason he went to jail was that he went to Catonsville, Maryland, and burnt down the draft board. And there were no computer records. So every man in Catonsville, Maryland never got drafted for the Vietnam War because there was no record and no possible way of recouping those records that he burnt to ashes. And he did go to jail for doing that. And when he got out of jail, when the war ended, he said that academia had failed America, that it had let us fight an immoral war without standing up and saying what was right, that it had bent to the status quo, to the source of money for universities, and that really never took a stand that was clearly morally the right stand. And so he refused to go back to the university. He had been a full professor at Notre Dame, and he would never go back to the university. And what he did was very interesting. He came to New York City. He took up residence at Fordham University, but refused to teach. He just lived in the residence. And he began working at St. Clair's Hospital in Lower Manhattan. St. Clair's Hospital no longer exists. It went out of business because it went broke. But before it went broke, it served an interesting role. It was in one of the two epicenters in the United States of the AIDS epidemic. And so Dan Berrigan, this famous philosopher with hundreds of publications, was working as a nurse's aide. And that was the only job he would accept, was a nurse's aide. He never changed. He was working as a nurse's aide when the AIDS epidemic hit Greenwich Village, and was working at St. Clair's Hospital. He volunteered for the AIDS unit in an era where people were literally getting into spacesuits to go near AIDS patients, when surgeons were refusing to do life-saving surgery on AIDS patients, just letting them die and walking out of the hospital. It was an era where people were frightened of this disease and those patients in a way that is actually hard to even remember, and certainly to conceptualize that. And Dan Berrigan worked on that unit as a nurse's aide, and his job was basically comfort care, because there were no treatment for AIDS. And at that point in time, everybody who made it to the hospital with HIV basically died. And these patients, it was the giant terminal care units were really what the HIV units were all about. And his specialty was keeping people comfortable. But what he also did was watch. So lo and behold, he had a really good friend when I was at Stony Brook who was on the faculty who invited him to talk to the physicians at Stony Brook. Now, we were all baby boomers. Everybody knew who this guy was. So it was like hero time. And we packed an auditorium of 500 seats. And we're waiting for this great Daniel Berrigan to come and talk to us. We waited and waited for 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Can't believe it. There's no Dan Berrigan. Then all of a sudden, this guy who's been sitting in the corner of the room in a dirty white t-shirt and dirty jeans and sneakers and a coffee cup that was actually a half-inch shorter than it had started because it was cardboard and had shrunk because it had been sitting there, stands up, walks to the podium, puts the coffee cup down, really looks like a homeless guy, stands up there and starts talking, and for the next hour and a half, you could have heard a pin drop. Because what he talked about was observations of doctoring from the feet of dying patients by a nurse's aide. And that was his talk. What he had observed for these years of how good and bad doctors took care of AIDS patients in this hospital. And in the end, he had made a lot of observations that made people squirm, and some that made people feel good. And then he said, so let me sum it all up. He said, I figured out what makes good doctors really good. Every morning, they wake up, and in their head, they have a vision of what the perfect doctor they're supposed to be is. And every day, they try to get a little closer to that image. And they know they're never going to make it. But every day is another step closer to the doctor they really should be. And those are the doctors I want caring for everyone I love. And all the others who are satisfied that they're smart and they know it all, I don't want anywhere near me or anyone I care about. So he was talking about the future, knowing what a very special person should be. So here's Dan Berrigan today. He is the only person, by the way, that the New York Times ever has published an obituary on a living person because he felt he was one of the greatest people that lived in the last century. And they actually published his obituary, still alive. They published his obituary a year and a half ago as a tribute to him so he could read his own obituary. And that was the picture that they used. Well, when you present people with a view of the future, what kind of things happen? Well, the first thing is, if you're working in an institution that specializes in mediocrity, everyone will quickly give you a long list of why you can't do what you want to do. And it's very astute, it's right on target, it's not flamboyant, they will articulate perfectly why it's impossible for you to do what you're going to do. Starts with not enough money, not enough resources, everyone's tired, nobody cares, the institution won't support you, the elevators don't work, the floors are the wrong color, and on and on and on. And I've worked in institutions like that, so I know that institutions that have really glorified mediocrity as the peak of existence are really, really incapable of any change. Well, sometimes people actually react the other way and begin to tell you what would be needed to get to your vision, and let's get going. Some people see change as an opportunity. Other people think the whole thing is nonsense. Leave me alone. Leave me on my own turf. I don't want to change. I'm comfortable. I'm playing out this hand of my life. Don't disturb me. I'm going to retire someday. Just leave me alone. There's a lot of people like that. They tend not to foster a visionary culture in an institution. They tend to protect themselves, and usually they're not on the team that you want leading you forward. So what do you need to look forward? Because, you know, here's this medical school that we had to design for almost a decade after we were doing the designing. And we came up with a list. You need leaders. Change doesn't happen without leaders. You need some people who are creative, who like to work with each other. You cannot have antagonistic people in the room. You can have people with different points of view. You can have people who call you on your vision, but you can't have people who are obstructionists in the room. And we actually got rid of those people. Never in my life did I ever think I would have the power to just get rid of the obnoxious people and invite them never to come back, but that's what we did when we were designing this medical school, because we didn't have time to deal with the naysayers. So we just told them, thank you, we love you, and it was really nice that you wanted to volunteer for this committee, and we appreciate if you never come again. Then we said, we really need a few flexible people, because if you fill a room with creative people, you just create complete intellectual chaos. You need a couple of creative people and a lot of people who can go with these creativity and say, that isn't a bad idea, maybe I could actually do that. So we looked for a lot of creative people and flexible people working together. Then you need an institution that has a little bit of confidence, because remember, we know we're going to fail. Every time you do daring things, some of the things you try fail. So the only way you can embark on an endeavor where you know you're going to fail is to have confidence. You have to absolutely be intolerant of mediocrity. In fact, I've often been quoted as saying that I would rather have somebody who wants to be rock bottom in their field than someone who wants to be mediocre. At least that's a goal that makes you stand out. But I prefer people who like excellence. You have to be willing to critically look at everything, including the thing you just said 10 seconds earlier. I worked for a man at Mount Sinai named Barry Kohler, who said to me that only a handful of people can dispassionately deconstruct, critique, and throw out what they themselves created. And if you are not one of those people, you don't have the right to lead. Think about that, because it's not so easy to throw out what you created, because you really were in love with it once upon a time, otherwise you wouldn't have created it. You have to know what to save and what to throw out from the past. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. You have to be impatiently patient, and you have to keep saying, this isn't just my perspective. I kind of keep thinking about everybody's perspective in this, or else I'm going to be looking through at the future through a little cardboard tube. And I'm going to see a really weird view of the future that isn't expansive and really isn't the right view. So you got to keep thinking, did I include everybody's perspective in where we're going? Obviously, eventually you got to have clear goals. You got to be positive, almost euphoric. You have to have a way to make decisions. You cannot debate forever, because we'd be still debating the first value. But you have to have values. You have to manage conflict. You have to cooperate with each other, and you've got to be willing to take risks. If you can't take risks, you can't change anybody. So vision is about the mission of an organization, the culture, dealing with all the forces internally and externally that push on an organization and try to make it shape in a way that those forces like. And it's about having passion for that vision. So you got to make the vision enticing enough to people that people get excited about it. If they don't get excited about it, oh hum, so it's a nice vision. You know, the vision of medicine in 2020 is what? You know, is it that we're just going to wave a wand like Dr. Spock over every patient? That sounds pretty boring. Is it, data management? Wow, that's fun. Tons of data coming in, and I sit at the computer and sort it out. I know I wanted to go to medical school to be a data manager. So, we have to envision something that is special about the future that is likely to happen. So, we have to be able to carefully manage our present, selectively forget the past. We can't selectively forget the past, we can't move forward. So we got to throw out the things that really don't work and hang on to the things that are intimately and always true and right. And then we have to create the future. So think about this for physicians. If you read some of the oaths, like the oath you're going to take on Friday, medical students, These oaths were written thousands of years ago. And yet, except for the fact that the language may be a little bit archaic and not seem like modern English, since none of them were written in English, the fact of the matter is that these oaths are still relevant today because there are parts of doctoring that never, ever have changed. So if we create a school that doesn't create doctors who can listen, who have empathy, who can connect with patients and create a bond of trust in a matter of minutes in the most tense and threatening situations that patients ever face, then we'll be useless. Because without that, no matter how smart you are, you can't be effective. On the other hand, all the facts of science change almost every 7 years. There's about 10 billion facts that are known in how the human body works. And the idea that we would teach science today, the way I was taught science, where you attempted to memorize every single fact that was known about the functioning of the human body for one moment in time, the day you took USMLE Step 1, and then regurgitate those thousands of facts in one split second to get a good score on that test and then forget about it, would be a crazy way to teach science. Because all the facts of science will be on your phone. But you have to know how to find it and how to use those facts. And you have to understand the concept that those facts are linked to, because otherwise you will not be a rigorously thinking doctor. So we have to think about what things do we throw out, what things do we save. Also, how do we measure that we've done a good job and we're really excellent? Well, we could measure how well we do teaching, research, clinical care, or any of the other things that are part of our mission as a medical school. We could look at some of the specific subject areas, the basic science, the clinical science, the technology that we have to teach. So, isn't it important that besides the stethoscope in your left pocket, you're going to have a handheld ultrasound in your right pocket? And even though I loved percussing the liver size, I actually know that probably an ultrasound probe of the liver with an actual measurement of the liver is probably going to be more accurate than my percussion, even though I love percussing patients. I percussed my wife until she was black and blue while I was working with her. I became a master percussor. But the fact of the matter is that part of vision is knowing when the thing you love most is anachronistic, and letting go and replacing with something that's more effective. And that's really painful. We could judge our products, our students, our graduates, and ultimately our practicing physicians. How do they do in the future? Are they comfortable with change? Or are they stuck on the last thing they learned as if it was true forever? What about the people on the outside, our peers and the consumers, the people who go to our students as physicians, the health systems and hospitals and clinics that hire them? Will we be ready for the future, and can we measure this? Also, whose vision of the future do we want? Do we want the student's vision? Probably. Right? I think that's important that we get the student's vision. Do we want the doctors out in practice? Do we want their vision of what's right and wrong about the world they practice in today, so we can at least begin to think about what we're going to throw out and what we're going to save? What's broken and what isn't broken? I think so. And we want it from special doctors. So Dr. Battinelli, you may not know this, but when he went in front of the medical boards of every hospital or health system and said, we want faculty to teach our medical students. And we want faculty who, and he gave a long list of attributes, but in the end he said, but we want faculty who love being a doctor. Now it's very interesting. I have to tell you that the people who most reacted with their hair standing on end every time he said that were all the psychiatrists in the audience. And they still to this day don't understand why the psychiatrists were so convinced that there are no doctors who love being a doctor. But somehow the psychiatrists in the audience all got really crazy over him saying that. But then he would follow that statement by saying we have 9,000 doctors in the health system and I only need 100. I'm sure I can find 100 out of 9,000 who still like being a doctor, and the rest of you can stay home. And that always kind of silenced the room. But in fact, we do need the perspective of the doctors who really care about their patients. We need faculty perspective. If faculty don't like working in this medical school, if they don't feel rewarded and welcomed, if they're not promoted, their careers aren't advanced, they don't believe that I'm really out for them and not for me, they're not going to like being here. Because people come to work because they have to trust the institution they work for is thinking about their future and their vision. Well, what about the next level of training? Would it be bad if we graduated people that every residency program in the country said, ugh, yuck, what did you do to these kids? Yes, that would be bad. So we also want to understand, what does the next level of training want in terms of readiness to learn their specialty at their level? And we need to meet that. And that what they will want will change with time. And so we need to think about, you know, what does a vascular surgery residency want in 2020? What does a pediatric residency want then? Do we care about the patients? Of course we do. And you know that every time you survey patients, what is the one thing patients want from their doctor? That they listen. They never say, I want the smartest doctor, never. They never say, I want the perfect. They always want the doctor who listens to them, the doctor who pays attention, the doctor who cares about them. I will tell you a secret. Patients are uniquely bad judges of the technical quality of their doctors. Incredibly bad judges. I mean, I've seen patients willing to lie down on the tracks for a doctor who was so technically awful that it was frightening that they were taking care of anyone. But if that patient told me that, what I knew was one thing for sure. That doctor cared about their patients. Incompetent, behind the times, never read after they left medical school, but they transmitted to that patient that they truly care. And if patients don't sense that you care, they don't trust you. No one wants you going through the motions. If they don't sense that you care, they'll shop around for somebody else. It's that simple. How about the payers? You know, we have the most expensive, mediocre healthcare system in the world. And I think the payers have finally said enough is enough. You know, just because you can create the penultimate effects on a few acute illnesses that require incredible high technology applications to succeed is not the benchmark of a successful healthcare system whose responsibility is every patient in society. And so we have to respond to this and produce efficient, effective, high-value care. Well, do we care about U.S. News and World Report? I guess not. We got 40 incredibly brilliant students with no ranking in U.S. News and World Report. So there's proof positive that there actually are people under the age of 40 who are daring enough to go to a school that isn't in that ridiculous ranking system. So for now, we're skipping U.S. News and World Report. But do we care about how we see ourselves? And of course, that's the most important thing. If we don't agree that we've set our own standards and are living up to it, nothing else matters. Well, there are internal forces that push us. Culture, resources. We can't do things beyond our resources. Our strengths and weaknesses. It's not an accident that we decided to have students going and becoming EMTs. We happen to inherit a 100-ambulance emergency medicine system. So we went with our strengths. There's local and regional factors that we have to take into account, and we have to remember that we have to both take great care of patients and educate physicians to be great doctors simultaneously. It isn't one or the other. And those missions are sometimes in conflict, or they seem to be in conflict. And we have to resolve those multiple missions to create greatness in the future. And then there's external forces. We talked about the healthcare system and its need for whatever you want to think. Primary care docs, care across the continuum, efficient care, effective care, care that touches patients and leaves them feeling like they actually were cared for. Knowledge is exponentially expanding, and we have to deal with a whole new way to teach doctors to handle knowledge. Information technology will help, but it will also overburden us with data. And when I jokingly said doctors have become data managers, it's not a joke. Unfortunately, we're not getting a lot of information, we're getting a lot of data. And part of this medical school's obligation will be to teach people how to take in data and convert it to useful information to improve the care of patients, not to just be overwhelmed with numbers. We need to look at how the models of care are going to change. Every once in a while, someone will try to convince me that I should go to the barricades in the streets protesting something that is infringing on the real good practice of medicine. And lots of times I agree with them and I'm ready to cause a riot and do whatever it takes. But lots of times what they're complaining about, I know, is their wish. They wish medicine were only like that. But it isn't. And in fact, it's changed. And the thing you're protesting against is actually pretty effective and working really well. And it flies against their old value system and their old assumptions. But in fact, from the patient's perspective, what they're railing against is working really good for patients. We have to recognize when our most beloved things are actually in conflict with reality. And we should try to reconcile that conflict because usually reality is teaching us something. Of course, patient demands, wants versus needs. You know, patients want everything, but they don't necessarily need everything. And how do we deal with that in the future? And of course, the market. So let's go through our values and take each value, except the two we've already looked at, innovation and vision, which is what we're talking about today, and think about how in the future might each of these values guide us. So community. When I went to medical school, besides the unique school I went to being an every man for himself school, and there were very few women, so it was definitely every man for himself, the obligation was clearly delineated to me. I was to close the door of the exam room, go over to my patient, and spend the entire GMP of the world on that encounter, if that's what it took to take any chance of improving that patient, regardless of the entire devastating impact on the rest of the country or the world. That was the ethos that I was meticulously taught. And that is so stupid, it's hard to believe anyone ever taught it at any point in time. But now we know. We have a moral obligation for the entire health of the population that has to be balanced with the individual need of the patient you're seeing at any moment in time. And that if we don't strike that balance as professionals responsible for both society and individual patients, we're going to create a worse mess than what we're in right now. How will we advance the care of patients in the future? The old way to do scholarship was to sit at the bench, do basic science until you stumbled on something that looked like it might be related to human disease, try to find a bunch of friends who could help you make the connections, and hope that eventually whatever you discovered could be applied to explain normal or abnormal physiology, and then maybe one day, if you really hit the lottery ticket, you'd figure out some way to intervene on that discovery, and everybody'd be better for it, especially you. That's probably not the kind of scholarship we need. That same man, Barry Kohler, who was one of my true heroes in life, is now the physician-in-chief of the Rockefeller University and one of the really great researchers in the world. And Barry said to me about 3 years ago, if we could teach doctors how to put into practice every single proven thing that we have proven in the last 50 years instead of ignoring most of them, we would save more lives than any research that will be done in the next 100. The scholarship that is begging to be done as knowledge moves at warp speed is how do you translate knowledge to practice? And if you start off as a person who doesn't like change, you just put the blinders on and keep moving forward the way you were taught and ignore all of the new things that are coming down the road. And so if I asked you, how is it possible that less than 50% of people with hypertension are adequately treated when we have 150 drugs that do it almost without side effects? How could this be possible? How is it possible that we still don't give aspirin to people who walk in the door with chest pain? And we can go on and on and on. And the problem is translating what we know works to what we do has been an almost insurmountable activity in medicine, as hard as that is to believe. The average time from a proven therapy being generally accepted in medicine has been 17 years. Think about how many people die in 17 years while people are pondering whether there's a real improvement or not. We need a scholarship that looks at how to change that, how to understand and constantly keep redefining best care, and all of the people in this room can do that kind of scholarship. Learning is going to change. This damn Gen Y, they keep learning differently than we do. Right? You guys use these devices that have only a few words on the screen, and you look things up very quickly, like right while the professor is talking, and then you correct them. You know, and so how do we stimulate learning in an environment where it's no longer designed around the teacher performing, but the student learning? And how do we do it in the future as more and more information becomes presentable in completely different ways and different formats? And we need to think about that, and we need to be daring, we need to be ahead of the game. And we've been working on that continuously since the start of this, but my guess is that the new ways of learning that will happen in the next 10 years will make everything we thought about in the last 20 dwarf. I don't think humanism is going to change a whole lot, but it's going to be threatened. Technology is a sidebar tool to help you be an effective doctor. And if it ever gets in between you and the patient, it is destructive. But it's seductive. So how do you prevent this seductive technology from being destructive to good doctoring? And that's going to be the issue. How do we make sure that the doctors tend to their own humanism? Because the data is now incontrovertible that doctors with emotional burnout deliver worse and worse care to their patients. How do we take care of ourselves and respect what is human about our patients in a world where every day we're going to be seduced by another toy that seemingly will make it easier to probe the human body and technically make a person better? Well, it doesn't take much to know that the world we live in the New York metropolitan area, ethnic diversity, economic diversity, we have diversity of every conceivable kind. Diseases that I used to learn as a curiosity in medical school arrive at Kennedy Airport every day and then become embedded in immigrant communities, so that you know, the parasites that I never thought I would see are now everyday experiences in hospitals very close to us. The world has shrunk, and we need to understand all the different ways that different people from different cultures see health and disease, see themselves, what they need from a physician, because remember, the first skill of a physician is to be an actor. If you can't be the doctor that patient needs at that moment, you can't be effective. Patients have intense needs for who that doctor is who's looking at them. And you need to become that doctor for that patient. And if you don't understand the cultural background of how people see doctors, health, and disease, there is no hope that you can become that doctor and be effective in that moment of need. Professionalism, to me, is summed up in one simple sentence. Are you willing to accept that to become a physician, you have to allow a personal transformation to occur, and you will never again be the person who arrived in this school? That's a very scary proposition. You got to let go of who you are and become somebody else. And sometimes the path to that somebody else can be rocky, but usually at the end of the road, it makes a lot of things very, very special. And we can't let the students that we teach in this school lose sight that yes, you're supposed to be honest and empathetic and altruistic and all the other lists of virtues that are so wonderful that nobody could ever argue against them. But the fact is, what really is the essence of the profession we want to graduate is someone who has earned the right to be called doctor by the person who's greeting you at the gas station, by the person who meets you at the PTA meeting. Because they don't say Attorney Jones. They don't say Carpenter McDonald, but they say Dr. Smith. And the reason is because they, representing all of society, recognize that the good doctors have made a personal transformation and are no longer just a person. They have allowed that to happen and they're now a healer. And we need a culture and an atmosphere where even in the future, that is allowed to happen. Well, we talked about this. Every patient knows whether it's about you as a patient. And I'll just leave it at that. We have the most perfectly designed, caregiver-centered care in this country that could ever happen. Our entire care system is designed so that the practitioner's life goes as smooth as possible. One day we will actually design care around patients. But individual moments are very patient-centered. And so, yes, we're going to work to change the system and make it designed around patients, but every time we walk up to that patient, there is a moment when you need to transmit to the patient that it is all about them and not about you. And of course, none of this happens if you don't stop and think. So I used to tell people, in the old days meaning pre-work hours restrictions. That seems to be like the time when, the old doctors reminisce and the new doctors say, thank God. So in the old days, when people used to hang around the hospital all the time, because they were always seemed to be on call, although they were not working that hard. I just want you to know, despite what every old doctor says, all the young doctors today are working infinitely harder than the old doctors were. However, we were hung around more hours than they did. We didn't work anywhere near as hard as they worked, but we hung around forever. And in the process of hanging around and not working so hard, and patients staying 7, 10, 15 days in the hospital, so you were kind of babysitting them, and everybody kind of being a little low-key, and the data avalanche out of the computer wasn't happening because there were no computers, so it was really hard for anything to come out of the thing that didn't exist. You had time to sit and talk about how you felt when a patient died, to talk about how do you pronounce this word so I don't look silly on round, to talk about what it meant to be a third-year student or a fourth-year student or an intern in surgery or a resident in plastic surgery or a neonatologist when a 2-pound baby dies and the family is completely hysterical. What does it all feel like and mean? When I was a medical student, I never missed the midnight meal at Bellevue. Ever. And the rule was, if you weren't doing CPR, you came to the midnight meal. Even sometimes you could postpone CPR, although that wasn't always such a good idea. But everybody came to the midnight meal, and it was the leftovers from breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It was the most frightening food that you have ever seen in your life. But all the residents stopped what they were doing at midnight. They all came, they slopped all this greasy stuff on their plates, and they all sat together and talked. And the attendings who were in the hospital, mostly young attendings, would come up often to the midnight meal, and everybody would sit and reflect and grow to be physicians by being part of the fraternity and sorority of people exposed to those emotional situations and having to work through them, live through them, and become other kind of people at the other side of them. And we need to protect that time. So what about our medical school? Are we supposed to be the best? I always like the best, right? We're the best at work. We're not stopping in the middle. So what should we be the best at? And when should we make it to being the best? Do we have a timetable? Is it today? And who should judge whether we're the best? Us? We're the best. Other people? Well, here's some of my thoughts. Besides creating a welcoming learning community where faculty, students, and even patients will like coming, I want to make sure that we graduate rigorously trained physicians in a scientific era where memory is a silly way to approach understanding how the human body works. But conceptual learning and the use selectively of the data you need is much wiser. I want people to understand and embrace the modern technology of medicine, but never let it get in between them and their patients. I want them to be custodians of society's limited resources and use those resources to maximize health and not to minimize the chance that major portions of our society get no chance. I hope that they're able to change, that our graduates don't get locked in to the silliness of thinking that what they learned today is immutably true. At best, it's a hypothesis on what you should do that will be tested every day and discarded often. That you understand that there's incredible power in being someone's doctor. That there is healing in touching people. That you're given permission to do things that no one else in society can do. And that brings a burden of respect and the use of that power in the right way. And that ultimately, you have to be self-critical. You have to dig down into what is your assumptions that you don't think about every day. And those behaviors become habitual and say, are those assumptions still accurate? Or my vision of the future isn't that I should throw out those assumptions, or I should at least challenge them, because they may not be true anymore. And we tend not to think about our assumptions until somebody really shakes our cage and says something that really, really sends us in a frenzy because it goes against everything we believe. I want careful risk takers, but not overly careful people. I want people who know when to break the rules. I got in a lot of trouble many times in my career, but we won't go into that today. I want people who accept being a doctor, who never ever think that it's about going to work, who understand that the privilege of actually being paid an income for taking care of patients is only allowed as a byproduct of giving impeccably excellent care to those patients. It is not the goal of getting up in the morning. The goal of getting up in the morning is to take care of patients. I worked for many years with an internist out on Long Island named Jerry Eastman, and he was probably 60 when I joined the practice. And every day he would come in to me and say, it still amazes me that I get paid to do something that I would do for free every day of my life. He said, every time I get a paycheck, I'm just stunned. And it's been 30 years, and I can't believe someone would actually pay me to do this, because it's just so great. I hope that people have heroes. If you don't have heroes, I feel bad for you. And mentors who help you get where you need to be. I want graduates, a graduate who does good. I don't care if you are good, but I do care if you do good. Being good is okay. It's kind of like that list of virtues. It's probably good to be good because bad things happen to bad people, but it's much more important that you actually do good. But last, that you actually have joy in being a physician. And if we don't graduate people who are joyful in the life of taking care of people, whether they're neuroradiologists or general pediatricians, if they don't have joy every day in what they do to take care of patients, we've totally failed. Totally. So we'll close with one last story. One of my favorite things in life, and Dave alluded to this, was doing morning report. I did morning report probably 95% of the mornings for 20 years of my life. When I was the residency director at both Stony Brook and Mount Sinai, I didn't allow anyone else in the room. No faculty were invited. The chairman was not invited. No one was invited. It was me and the residents. And every morning we did morning report. And I did a lot of funny things in morning report. If any of the people who were my residents know what I did, I always called on people by name. I always called on people who looked like they were sleepy. I had an incredible antenna for people who were daydreaming. And the person who was presenting the case was always off the hook. They were just a prop for the rest of our discussion. So I never asked the person who was presenting the case ever a single question. And I had a theory that there was no boring case. So nobody could say, I don't have any interesting cases today, Dr. Smith. That was like the kiss of death. If you said that, I was like in your face, pulling out the things in your pockets, looking at your admission list. So one day I'm sitting there, and this intern, or this resident, is presenting the most boring case I have ever heard. It was so boring I was contemplating suicide. And I'm looking around the room, and like people's heads were banging against the wall. And this resident's like completely oblivious to it. So I go out, time out, time out. So now everybody in the room wakes up instantly because they think, oh my God, what just happened? He's going to ask me a question. I've just been sleeping through this incredibly boring case. I don't know anything that was just said. And so instead of asking them some crazy question on this incredibly boring case, I said to them, are we all having fun? Now let me tell you what happens when you do that to residents, because residents are very cynical. I said, are we all having fun here today? And they're all thinking, oh crap, he's going to talk about the good old days. So not to disappoint them, I said, you know, in the good old days, people actually liked being residents. You guys really look pretty bored today. And then, oh, they're rolling their eyes. And we talked a lot about being a doctor and what was going on in the hospital and why this case seemed boring, which was really because it was untreatable, and how many people come into the hospital at the end of life when they should be kept comfortable at home, and how frustrating it is for everyone. But then I looked around the room, and I still to this day don't know why, but I said to them, are any of you afraid of falling in love with being a doctor? Now, I'd never asked anybody that question before, and I just threw it out to the room. And the young woman resident in front of me started crying. She literally started crying. I said, oh boy, here we go. And everybody's like tearing up in the room, and people are sweating. And so I turned to her and I said, what's the matter? And she said, I want to be a person, I want to be a wife, I want to be a mother, and I love being a doctor, and every day I try to stop it. I stop that feeling because I don't know what will happen to me if I ever love being a doctor. I try to just keep it as the thing I'm doing. And I'm sitting there, and I'm crying now. Not literally, because it's bad for the residents and residents. But emotionally I'm crying. And I'm thinking, I am in charge of the education of 150 medicine residents, 300 students who come through this service, and I've got residents sitting on my service in front of me who are afraid to fall in love with being a doctor. And I know there are only two kinds of doctors in this world. The doctors who hate being a doctor and the doctors who love it, and there's nobody in the middle. And we all know the doctors who hate it because they never shut up complaining. Every day, night and day, about the entire world being designed to screw them. And then the people who love being doctors actually go to work and take care of patients and love what they do. And how could I have an educational environment where people were actually afraid of falling in love with being a doctor? How scary that was to me. And I swore from that moment on that I would address that issue every day. And when we created this medical school, we're darn sure we're not going to graduate students who are afraid to fall in love with being a doctor. We're going to try to graduate people who every day wake up joyful, happy, and privileged that they have the right in our society to intimately take care of patients, to be healers, to be there when people die, to help them through their suffering, and to be intertwined in the lives of people like no one else in our society is privileged to do. So, we'll keep our eyes on the ball in the future, we'll keep changing, we'll keep destabilizing everybody, and thanks for being here.
It's obvious why he did the vision talk. So, questions? Yes.
Dr. Smith,
Hi.
you have delivered one of the best of what I don't know whether it's a lecture or speech heard. And you reminded me of the commencement address that speech jobs delivered at Stanford University. It's a security line that don't accept the dogma of somebody else. You know. Now, I have two comments you could consider a question. Dr. Brockman, in his book, How Doctors Think, said that we are training doctors now to be like robots, you know, who adheres to algorithms and whatever that they follow. And if the patient does not follow the algorithms, they get frustrated with it. Now the question is, we cannot ignore technical advances. We really need it. I don't accept it because I'm old. You know, old people are usually afraid of technical advances, you know, like computers and smartphones. You know. And how will you reconcile the training of future doctors in our medical school with welding the technical part of it with the humanisms that is required for being a good doctor? And the other thing that I want to make a comment about your glorifying mediocrity. It is an essential part if you belong to a hospital like where I belong, you know. That mediocrity is glorified because otherwise you'll be ruined. That's the politics of hospitals.
Well, I hope we glorify the best better than we do with the mediocre. But let's talk about Dr. Brockman, who wrote a book on how doctors think, and he talked about diagnostic mistakes, and he talked about why physicians presented with cases that perhaps another physician seeing the same patient would have actually accurately diagnosed, but people went completely down the wrong paths, often using very algorithmic, structured approaches to complaints that led them awry. I hope that our complete de-emphasis on memorizing facts and our emphasis that everything is learned solving clinical problems, our problem-based Pearl sessions, the way we teach introductory clinical medicine, will teach people that there is no shortcut. Memorizing the Krebs cycle isn't going to work, and memorizing the algorithm for moderately severe asthma isn't going to work. That it's about looking at the patient, understanding the abnormal physiology, and then trying to make sense that your explanation or diagnosis actually explains what the patient is telling you. And I'm hoping that we've spent a lot of time creating a curriculum that isn't about memorizing, that it's about thinking right from day one. And I hope that it addresses that. You know it'll never address it completely. I mean, people go down the wrong paths and have funny ways of, you know, thinking mistakes that are hard to correct. But I'm hoping that the problem-based curriculum that's always rooted in patient complaints really helps with that.
I just want to make another comment regarding, there was an article in the Sunday Times magazine that despite all these advances in medicine, both in science and the technical aspect of it, hospitals in the United States are not safe. And it's even more dangerous now than before. And why is that?
Well, hospitals are not safe because the more good things we do to people when we do them to the wrong people hurt them because they're more dangerous. And people are sicker and sicker. I think most of the people we admit to the hospital today, something's wrong with their immune system. And we keep people too long in the hospital when the benefit is done and the only thing left for them to do in the hospital is get side effects. And hospitals have become cultured breeding grounds for the most horrific bacteria we've ever seen. It's a lot of that stuff, and we're certainly working on it, but we all agree. Hospitals should be used judiciously for the people they help, and not indiscriminately where they more often cause harm than they do help.
All right. Thank you very much.